I knew no one at all in New York. I knew nothing about New York. All I knew was if you went to New York and you wanted to find boys, you went to Christopher Street. And so I went to Christopher Street. It's not hard to find. And you sit on a stoop. You can't do that these days, but in those days you could. And so I'm sitting on the stoop in little cut-off jeans, you know. I'm trying to wear the uniform, although I thought it was very unattractive and no one would care anyway. And Jamie Andrews came and sat down next to me, and he began to run his fingers like inside the cut-off jeans, you know. And I was so shy then that I was like, you know, like not reacting at all. I didn't know how to react. I didn't know what to do. And so he said, then that's when he told me about Jackie Curtis's wedding on the rooftop. And that was what, 1969? It's the day the men landed on the moon. So I said, Jane, let's go. Well, I said, Wayne, let's go. And Wayne wouldn't go. And so I thought for a minute about not going myself because I didn't know any of those people, just a guy who was touching my thigh and things. But I went, and that night of Jackie's wedding, I met Jackie, I met Andrea, I met Hollywood Lawn, and I met Tony and Gracia, and various other people, you know. I mean, it was an amazing, like, okay, you want to come to New York, you little Kentucky shit? Well, here it is. Here is New York. Now, see if you can handle it, you know. It was just like everybody got thrown at me in one night. Then Andrea took me to the reception. Your camera may not be able to believe this, but in those days I was quite a cutie. And during the course of the reception in the back room of Max's Kansas City, Jackie said, I have to go get some things for my apartment. Now, she was living with Ruby Lynn Rayner. They had no electricity. And so she said, will you go with me because it's going to be very dark. I need someone with me. And so I thought, Jackie Curtis, and oh, yes, of course I'll go. And so I went, and when we got there and she closed the door, she came like 1 inch from me and just stood there. And even in my complete naive Kentucky capacity, I knew what was supposed to happen. But I couldn't do it. So I just stood there too, just stood stock still, and we were like 1 inch, and she was like right there, waiting for like the big Gary Cooper embrace, and it didn't happen.
Who do you miss the most and why?
Now you're starting to sound like Barbara Walters. You're going to ask me what tree I would be eventually.
That'll never happen.
Andy Warhol. Because he first taught me how to respect myself. Because I had no talent. I was a stupid kid from Kentucky, and he was Andy Warhol. And he immediately treated me like an equal. And he would say, sometimes he was making fun of me. I know now, but it doesn't matter now because it worked. Because he'd show my photographs to people and say, look at Lee's pictures, aren't they great? They're never in focus. And I guess he was making fun of me, but it was cool to me because he was giving me approval.
Where did your passion and obsession for rock and roll come from?
Back in the 50s, that's all we had was rock and roll. We had transistor radios and the occasional appearance of somebody on Ed Sullivan, who, although he was reputed to be a mighty bastard, broke a lot of barriers. And I will always love him for that. But we had transistor radios, and we would go to bed with them in the dark. And we would have the transistor radio next, and it was a new thing then, the transistor radio. And we would have it next to our ears, and it would take us away to another world. A fabulous world, a fun world, you know, and, you know, a world of people that, you know, I didn't even dream that I would ever get to meet, you know, and then I got to meet. But that's how I got into it, because I got into photography, like I told you, so that I would have a camera in front of me so I'd have something to do. And when I got to New York, I was photographing drag queens because they were the most fabulous looking people on earth. But then, accidentally, I got thrown at Leee. And then from photographing Leee that whole summer of 1969, suddenly I was doing rock and roll photography, and it was not a plan of mine. And suddenly I was inside the transistor radio then. I realized that I wanted the rebellious and the young and the beginning rock and roll to be what I photographed. I mean, even, later, a lot of people that I photographed when they were young and rebellious, when they became very famous and everything, then everybody else was photographing and they didn't need me anymore. See, I don't photograph seashells or mountains or driftwood. I photograph junkies before they're junkies. And they're full of energy and they're full of rock and roll and they're covered with pimples and they're wonderful, and some of them will make it and some of them won't. And there's nothing I would less like to do than be down in the pit at Madison Square Garden photographing the Rolling Stones. Much as I love them, they're good friends, but they don't need me to take their picture. So I take snapshots. And the reason it's like snapshots is because they're kids. And that's what you do with kids. You don't get a makeup artist and a hairstylist and do all that kind of stuff. Peter Frampton, when I first did him, that's what it was. It was snapshots of a really cute little guy who just loved playing rock and roll. And then look what happened to him later. Suddenly his hair was all permed and he had purple eyeshadow on. And, give me a break. I don't want to get involved after that point, And so that's still my favorite kind of photography. It hasn't made me rich, but it's made me happy.